Last time, in our last lecture, we were screaming about the United States government and its many failings. I want to make clear something, and unfortunately, in the current context, I must tell you that many of you who came here to hear a course on philosophy and human values probably expected more philosophy and less on the human values side. Well, I hope some of you were here yesterday when I ran through a series of ethical theories. And I think I gave some arguments. That was my professionalizing work. In other words, that was the display of my rough credentials to do this. Now I'm on to a topic of which I consider, and so far, in a way, it's just groundwork for the other stuff, because all of the great ethical theories of the past, in a way, do contain utopian moments. In a way, being a Stoic, an Epicurean, being someone who pursues excellence, are all interesting and historically recoverable, in a certain sense, projects. What I pointed out today is that the situation in which we find ourselves in modern life, in the present, means that there are other conditions that must be met to even pursue those projects. So I don't see the two sets of remarks as different as you might think. It's not as I did philosophy one day and politics the next, because such watertight distinctions are not viable between philosophy and politics. And again, before I return to Marx, let me try to indicate that the priority of politics is marked even in the Greeks, where the last thing that Aristotle wrote was a constitution for Athens. He wrote that, last, after he had written the metaphysics, the physics, the logic, and all this. I have a feeling that he thought that constitution as important as anything he wrote. We certainly know about Plato writing the Republic, that remark about the best kind of state, and that debate in Plato is certainly as important as anything he wrote. So, in a way, even the classic philosophers, the ones that the people from the National Association of Scholars love, understand that politics, as it were, sets those boundary conditions and those necessary conditions within which human beings can pursue things like a good life for themselves. And so those are the conditions that I was discussing last time, and trying to discuss them in the context of the present. And for that I found Marx helpful in one respect. I want to point out something about that, though. There is a severe problem with the writings and the work of Marx that's all too obvious to us today, and that's that the assumption that workers shaping and forming their own modes of work wouldn't fall victim to the power of the state, which would now step in place of a capitalist class, exploit their labor in the same way, not exactly in the same way. They'd use different words and all that. As I said, pretty much from the bottom, it's hard to tell the difference. But, they'd use a different ideology. But his expectation that the state would do more than administer and would actually control the life of people was an absolute blind spot in his work. But then look at our liberal theorists. For them, an equal blind spot is that while they pay lip service to wanting to constrain the state, and let free enterprise flourish, that led, when it was tried, and it hasn't been tried in a long time, when it was tried, it led to a great, deep, worldwide depression that scared the capitalist class so much that no one's ever tried it again since. And no one plans to. President Reagan came into office promising to shrink the size of the state. As you may know, as a matter of fact, it's larger than ever. So that the process of a world becoming bureaucratically more complex and intrusive at the level of the state is a world phenomenon. It's not localizable. The process of an economy becoming ever more diverse, commodifying ever more sections of our lives, until we replace the Sunday stroll, to use another example. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that. When I'd go with my granddad, we'd go for a stroll on Sunday. Well, that can't be done now without a relation to the commodity. Well, it could be, but rarely is. We're socialized to go for a stroll someplace else on Sunday now. The mall is open in the afternoon, and even in North Carolina after church they open it up after church. You stroll through the mall so that you can both stroll and shop. Sort of the strolling aspect is still important. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not kind of kinky to walk around and watch people buy things. It's amusing. So I don't want you to think that Marx has a critique of capitalism only, and that's all I'm interested in. The critique of the state and the state bureaucracy is also important. And I've mentioned the name of Max Weber, but I didn't bring in any of his books. They're real thick, real boring, and I've suggested that a sense for what a modern bureaucracy is like can be evoked from reading the novels of Franz Kafka. Things like Before the Law and The Trial give you more of a sense of being caught in a modern bureaucracy. And all of you have that sense anyway. If you've moved to a new city and tried to hook up a telephone and they say, go to room 238. You go to room 238 and they say, where'd you come from? Who'd you talk to? You go, I forgot. They go, oh, no, you'll have to go back to room 104. You go to 104. 104 says, you've been to 232. Well, you can't come to room 104. Yeah, we all know this. And so for that, that's what modern bureaucracies look and feel like, you know. So for that, go to Kafka. So what I was trying to develop last time was a criticism of the state and the economy, of a new arising global order that now, I guess, has become popular enough to deserve the moniker New Order. A new order. I'm always suspicious of new orders. So now I'm going to drop back a level and look at some of the other factors that go into it, into the formation of human values other than, although I still think these are crucially important, other than the economic ones. And for that purpose, I just can't restrain myself from looking at a couple more of the critics of modernity, you might call critics of modern life, of the modern state, the modern economy, and of the conditions in which our modern culture is formed. And one of those critics that I think's come under fire in Time magazine and elsewhere is Nietzsche. You may have heard of him, Nietzsche. It's very popular now to see Nietzsche as sort of the new threat. You know, in the 60s, the right wing was worried that too many college professors read Marx. They don't worry about that anymore. People like Jan Ilster run huge institutes. They're analytic Marxists. That's respectable. Now you're looked at sort of, you know, it's a little funny, if your interest is in Nietzsche. And I'll try to explain first what's supposed to be so scandalous about Nietzsche. Nietzsche is supposed to hold the scandalous view that knowledge is a form of power. Now that's scandalous because knowledge is knowledge. It's objective, you know, like journalism. And it would be scandalous to show that wherever we find knowledge, we will find it structured and constructed around a system or systems of power. Won't find one without the other.